Hi, Chad, Versamatic. Today we're going to install a wet end kit into our E1 metallic, non-metallic center pump. Out front we have examples of Versamatic genuine parts in the form of air end kit and wet end kit. The rebuild you're going to see is accurate and man method of machine, but for video purposes some parts of the work performed have been condensed in time. At any part during the presentation, please pause this video until you have completed any part of the process. The pump we are using in this presentation has been built new and is considerably easier to work with than a pump that has been used in a process. Additional time may be required in the preparation and separation of components during the rebuild. Identifying which kit is required for your repair has become easier on newer pumps with the permanently affixed metal serial number tag that now indicates the wet end and air end kit information for the pump. Kit information can also be found in the service and operating manual. Versamatic genuine replacement parts, wet end and air end kits provide a bill of material of the components included in the kit. All items included in the kits are components that Versamatic recommends replacing when rebuilding a pump. The pump we are using today is an example of the ease of installation. Always consult your respective service and operating manual before performing any maintenance on your pump. Service and operating manuals include composite repair parts drawings, repair parts list, and torque specifications. For service and operating manuals and more information, visit us on the web at www.versamatic.com. Always remember that safety is the highest priority. When working on or around any equipment, always follow the correct safety procedures. Always read and follow the safety warnings and instructions in the service manual before any work is started on the pump. For more information, see the Warren Rupp video on safety at Versamatic.com. The wet side rebuild you're going to see today will include the following items: diaphragms, check balls, and O-rings. These are the recommended tools used with the rebuild. While the sizes may change based on the model, the type will remain the same. Torque wrench, ratchet, small slotted screwdriver, O-ring pick, Phillips head screwdriver, sockets and or wrenches, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 5/32 inch socket head Allen wrench. Alright, let's get started. For ease of disassembly, today we're going to use a 3/8 drive impact gun. First, we're going to take off the discharge manifold. Set the discharge manifold aside for later rebuild. Remove the discharge check balls and discard. Remove the valve seats. Discard the O-rings. Save the valve seats for later rebuild. Remove the main air valve. Now remove the suction manifold. Set aside the suction manifold for later rebuild. Now remove the suction valve seats. Discard the O-rings and set the valve seat aside for later rebuild. Remove suction check balls. Now remove one outer chamber. Set aside the outer chamber for later rebuild. Now remove the outer plate and the diaphragm assembly. Remove diaphragm, set aside outer plate for later reassembly. Set aside inner plate. Remove opposite outer chamber. Set aside the outer chamber for later rebuild. Pull the second diaphragm assembly out with the diaphragm rod. Now we're ready to remove the old diaphragm. Versamatic shafts have wrench flats on the rod to assist in diaphragm removal and installation when performing maintenance in the field. Today we will use a vise with soft jaws. Soft jaws are utilized to ensure that the shaft is not scarred, scratched, or damaged while the shaft is clamped in the vise. Remove the inner diaphragm plate. Discard the old diaphragm. And save the outer diaphragm plate. Inspect the inner and outer diaphragm plates. Ensure the plates have no sharp edges or scarring on the radius. Plates can be cleaned up with emery paper, crocus cloth, or fine sandpaper. Make sure the radius is maintained during cleanup. Replace if necessary. Inspect the diaphragm rod. Make sure you don't have any scarring, scratching, or damage to the diaphragm rod, and replace as needed. Now we're ready to install our wet end kit. Now install our outer diaphragm plate. This particular diaphragm is to be installed natural bulge in. Be sure to fully seat the outer diaphragm plate. And now we're ready to install our inner diaphragm plate with the radius facing towards the diaphragm. Be sure to torque the diaphragm assembly to the rod. Torque to the recommendations called out in the service and operating manual. Once the diaphragm assembly is torqued to the rod, apply a little grease to the diaphragm rod. Grease is applied to keep the items from catching, binding, or cutting while assembling components. Inspect the outer chamber for casting integrity. Inspect the machine surfaces and radius of the chamber for damage or material buildup. Scarring, scratching, or material buildup can be cleaned up using emery paper, crocus cloth, or fine sandpaper. Chamber orientation requires the discharge side of the chamber to be installed in the same direction as the air valve face on the center block. Now we're ready to install and bolt down our outer chamber. Once we torque our outer chamber bolts, we're ready to install our second diaphragm assembly. Install the outer diaphragm plate. Install the radius of the inner diaphragm plate towards the diaphragm. Begin the hand tighten on the diaphragm assembly to the rod and torque to factory specifications. If the diaphragm assembly achieves torque before bolt holes are aligned, always go forward, never back off. Note the alignment of the bolt holes on the diaphragm and the center section of the pump. Inspect the opposite outer chamber. Inspect the radiuses. Note the orientation of the outer chamber in relation to the center section of the pump. Now we're ready to install our outer chamber bolts. Once all outer chamber bolts are installed, be sure to torque these outer chamber bolts to factory specifications. Now install our suction side check balls. Inspect the valve seats. Inspect the machine surfaces, the sealing surface. The step in the valve seat will face towards the suction manifold. This allows for an O-ring groove to install our valve seat O-rings. Be sure to fully seat the valve seat O-ring into the groove. Inspect the machine surfaces of the suction manifold. Inspect the casting integrity. Inspect the threads. Orientation of the manifold is based on process requirements and may be reinstalled in either direction. Now install the bolts for the suction manifold. Torque the bolts down in a cross pattern and torque to factory specifications. Now we're ready to install our main air valve. Note the alignment of the air valve, the port holes and the bolt holes to the center section of the pump. Be sure to torque the main air valve to the center section to factory specification. Now we're ready to install our discharge valve seats. Note the step in the valve seat, inspect the machine surfaces of the valve seat. Install the step of the valve seat towards the discharge manifold. Be sure to fully seat the valve seat O-ring into this groove. Now we're ready to install our discharge check balls and our discharge manifold. Inspect the discharge manifold machine surfaces. Ensure that we have a good sealing surface. Inspect the integrity of the casting. Inspect the threads. Inspect the ball cages for any sharp edges. These ball cages can be addressed with light sandpaper or replace as needed. Orientation of the manifold is based on process requirements and may be reinstalled in either direction. Now we're ready to bolt down our discharge manifold and torque to factory specification in a cross pattern.
This concludes our wet side rebuild. When doing a complete rebuild, see our air side video, or for additional information, find us on the web at Versamatic.com or contact after sales support at service.versamatic@idexcorp.com. Thank you.